Welcome to our new series of bite-sized digital Bible studies. This is the second study in the series. It'd be great if you could grab a Bible so you can look up some of the Bible references, some of the verses that we'll be referring to during the study. That'd be great. If you were with us last week, you may remember that the topic that we're studying is who you say I am. You know, people often like to tell us what they think of us, don't they? And sometimes it's not in a very complimentary way. But we need to remember what matters is what God thinks of us, what God says that I am. I'd like to start off today with a challenge by asking you a question. What voices are you listening to in your life? You know, there are lots of voices coming from us, every direction, voices that tell us that we're not up to the mark, we're not as intelligent as others, we lack the right attributes to do a task, we're not as good at speaking as other people, you know, we aren't as good an athlete as others, or whatever. There are so many voices coming to us in our lives from every direction. But which voice should we listen to? Which voice are you listening to? Should we listen to the voices of others, or should we really listen to God's voice? Well, our studies are telling us that we should listen to God's voice, because God, it's Him who knows us through and through. It's God who made us, God who sees our real potential, and God knows what He made us to be. Blaise Pascal, who's a famous French mathematician and physicist, says this: we only know ourselves through Jesus Christ. We only know ourselves through Jesus Christ. If you want to know who you really are, who you were really meant to be, you need to listen to God. You need to find Jesus first, and then you will find yourself. If you joined us last week, you'll know that the key verse for our study about what God says we are is found in 1 Peter 2 verse 9. We'll just refer back to that right now. And it says there, reading from the New International Version, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of Him who called you out of darkness into His wonderful light. Last week we looked at how God says that we are a chosen people. And remember, we said it was great to be chosen. And we gave some examples of how we'd been chosen. But we realised that the main thing was that God has chosen us. God says, I am chosen. This week we're studying the next phrase that Peter used in verse 9. In that verse, Peter tells us that we are a royal priesthood. So we see here that we're called a priesthood. Not just a priesthood, but we're called a royal priesthood. Interestingly, in the Bible up to this point, there are not many references to us being a royal priesthood. Yes, there are a few references to priesthood, but not many references about us being a royal priesthood. The closest verse in the Old Testament to this concept is found in Exodus 19 verse 6. Shall we have a look again what that says? Exodus 19 and verse 6. And it says there in Exodus 19 verse 6 this: now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So we see here that it tells us that it tells the people, God's chosen people in the Old Testament, that they are a kingdom of priests, a kingdom of priests. These are the words that God speaks to the Israelites. So this is the context of this verse, is that Moses, the leader of the people of Israel, the one who had led them out of slavery from Egypt, had gone up to a mountain. God had called him up to a mountain. It was called Mount Sinai. to meet with God, and God had spoken to him and said these words, "Now if you obey me and fully keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." We know from the Bible, don't we, that Israel has a special place in God's heart, and they are his chosen people too. And he tells them, out of all the nations on earth, they can be a kingdom of priests if they obey him and keep his covenant. So what does this phrase mean? What is a kingdom of priests? What does it mean? What's its significance? It means the people of Israel would be both kings and priests as well. The expression kingdom of priests seemed to support two main ideas corresponding to the surrounding statements: that Israel would become God's special treasure and they would become a holy nation. This is a special place. It's a privileged position that the people of Israel were called to be, a kingdom of priests. It's interesting in the Old Testament because we read loads about the role of priests, a really important role, and how they had a privileged position. In Exodus, we see the line of priesthood is established from Aaron and his descendants. They were given the priestly role for the people of Israel. What were they to do? The people were separated from God. They could not come into his presence by themselves. They understood their sin could put them at risk of instant death, and if they were to come into God's presence. The priests were there to represent the people before God. They make sacrifices on their behalf, on behalf of their sin, and they would in turn represent God to the people, mediating God's forgiveness and blessings to those who had brought their sacrifice to atone for their sins and to offer God thanksgiving. It's really interesting because in the Old Testament we see that there's a set of special requirements that are set out that you need to meet if you're going to be a priest. The first one that we find is in Exodus 28 verse 1. First of all, to be a priest you have to be male. Secondly, you must be a descendant of Aaron, that's Exodus 28 verse 1, with a documented lineage. Thirdly, you had to be between the ages of 25 and 50 years old. Fourthly, you must be unblemished. You mustn't be lame, or you mustn't be blonde, have blonde hair. That's in Leviticus 21. Then you must have a proper marriage. You must not be married to a harlot, not married to a divorced woman, not married to a widow other than a priest's widow. And the high priest must marry a virgin of his own people. The marriage was important. You see, there's lots of requirements connected with marriage. Then you must not have any uncleanliness, so you mustn't have leprosy or anything like that. And then you must have an untrimmed beard with well-trimmed but unshaved hair. Now, in this coronavirus time, we can't go to have our beards trimmed, can we? We can't go to hairdressers to have our beards trimmed, so maybe we'll be okay. We are going to have untrimmed hair, untrimmed beards, aren't we, in this time? And then finally, you must be properly dressed. So you could only be a priest if you fulfilled all these criteria. So you can see you had to work hard to be a priest. It wasn't easy to maintain this privileged position. So that's what he said about priesthood in the Old Testament. Let's move back now, shall we, to the New Testament and to have a look again at the statement we find in 1 Peter chapter 2. You and me, we're called to be a royal priesthood. As we look back at what we've discovered in the Old Testament about priests, we see this term only applies to God's chosen people. So this term confirms, by Peter using this term, it confirms that we too are special to God. We're God's chosen people also. We are a royal priesthood. God has given us this special calling, this special place. He's given you this vocation, if you like. We're God's representatives too, just as the priests of the Old Testament were also representatives. Now you might be thinking, and this is a thought that I always had, How can I fulfill all the requirements of priesthood? How can I be a priest? When you look at the list that we've just gone through, what if I'm too young or too old? What if I'm female and not male? What if I have a blemish on my skin? We all suffer from blemishes on our skin from time to time, don't we? What if I haven't got a beard? Or what if I haven't got the knowledge and experience required? What if I struggle to speak up and speak out for God? What if I lack the confidence to be a priest? Let's just turn to 2 Corinthians in chapter 3. So it's 2 Corinthians and chapter 3 and verses 4 and 5. Let's just read from these verses now from the Bible. It says there, "Such confidence as this is ours through Christ before God. Not that we are competent in ourselves to claim anything for ourselves, but our competence comes from God." Our competence comes from God. He has made us competent. We see here that the Bible tells us that we are fully competent. We are fully capable to do what God's asked us to do, to fulfill the position that God has given us, to be part of the Royal Priesthood, not because we fulfill the requirements ourselves, but because our competence, our capability comes from God. It's through Him that we're Royal Priesthood today. It's through Him that we're able to represent God before other people. Everyone has insecurities in life, don't we? Everyone lacks confidence in certain situations. But let's not listen to these voices in our minds. Let's know and believe that we are who God says we are. We are a royal priesthood. We can represent God. We're competent in God. We're capable in God. Finally, I just want to have a look at just one other verse from the Bible, a really well-known verse, and it's found in Philippians chapter 4. Let's just turn, shall we, to Philippians chapter 4, and it's verse 13. And it says this, "I can do everything through Him who gives me strength." I can do everything through Him who gives me strength. It's a great verse, isn't it? A great verse, a great promise. I can do everything through Christ. Whatever God calls us to do, whoever God calls us to be, wherever God calls us to go, I can do it because I can do it through Jesus Christ. The key phrase here, of course, in this verse is through Christ. Through Christ. It's not through ourselves. It's not because of our own strength. It's not because of our capability that we can do it. It's not because of our competence. It's because of Jesus Christ. Because we belong to Jesus Christ. He gives me the strength to do whatever God calls me to do. So who does God say that I am? God says that I'm chosen. And He also says I am part of a royal priesthood. Let's not listen to those voices that stop us from being who God says I am. But let's take our competence, our capability and our strength from Him to be who He says that I am. So that's our Bible study for today. What we're going to do now is have a short pause, and then we're going to meet up live to have a short discussion about the Bible study. So if you want, please go and make yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and then sign into our online Zoom discussion using the link that we've sent to you via WhatsApp or Facebook, etc. Remember, you need to have Zoom application installed on your computer, your tablet or your smartphone in order to join us. If you haven't done this already though, don't worry. You will be prompted to install the Zoom application when you click on the link that we sent you, if you haven't done so already. And also, just to remind you, the application is free. You don't have to pay for it. So we'll see you in 10 minutes then.